Well, what a wonderful way to start the session today. And now it's my absolute pleasure. We welcomed back Lord Valence to techUK, but it's now my pleasure to welcome our next speaker for techUK for the first time. So we're delighted to be joined today by 𝗍𝗲 𝗀𝗲. He's the founding CEO of the Advanced Research and Innovation Agency, so ARIO, as the Minister just spoke about. 𝗍𝗲 has forged a career managing cutting-edge research and innovation for the benefit of society. He's previously founded Activate, a US-based non-profit which empowers scientists and engineers to bring groundbreaking research to market. Prior to this, 𝗍𝗲 established 2 science-based startups and served in the first generation of program directors at 𝗪𝗲. So please, can we welcome 𝗍𝗲 to the stage? Yeah. 𝗍𝗲, great to have you with us, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I feel like the Minister kind of gave you a good run-in. So perhaps in your opening remarks as we kick off, and I've got a few questions, and then we've got a bit of time for questions as well from the audience. So Perfect. If you've got a question for 𝗍𝗲, keep it and I'll come to you. But perhaps if you could just help kick us off, a great place to start would be, tell us a bit more about ARIO, its purpose, its mission, its ambition, and a bit more about your role at ARIO as well. Is that a good place to start?
Absolutely. And it was great to hear from Lord Valence. I have to say, just on a personal note, Lord Valence has been one of the best sort of mentors as I've come up to speed on the UK R&D system. And I think it's just such a privilege to have him thinking systemically about how to get the most out of science and research innovation in the UK. He spoke about the sort of systemic nature of this. There's so many rich assets in the UK and so much opportunity to get more for the future of the UK and the world in terms of actual benefits to society, quality of life, economic growth. ARIO is one new mode within that system. And I think it's important to recognize it as such. It's one that the team we've built, is very excited about what it can deliver, but it can only deliver as a piece of that broader system. What is ARIO? ARIO is a UK government funded and supported R&D funding agency sponsored by 𝗍𝗲. And what we do in a nutshell is provide what we think of as edge of the possible R&D grants and research contracts to go after inventions which may seem far-fetched, but if they were to work, they would be really transformational to the future. And why is that important? Why do we need sort of another mode to think about those really edge of the possible transformative technologies? Well, so much of human progress and social progress is downstream of research, basic science, innovation. And I think today, more than anything, if you look at kind of the cutting edge areas where we're seeing frontier technologies push us forward, whether that's AI or biotechnology, the power of these technologies is enormous. The stakes are really high in terms of the problems and opportunities. And because these sorts of innovations are not, they can't be driven by everyone. You need specialized expertise. You need specialized scientific infrastructure. What I like to say is that there are only a few places in the world that have the concentration and depth of scientific expertise and research capacity to change the world with science. And the UK is certainly one of them. And so the government set up ARIO essentially with the ambition to say, this is such a rich ecosystem, how do we get even more out of it? And if you want to get different results, you need to do things differently. So if there's one thing to take away, ARIO was set up with a mandate to deliver these results for the future of the UK and the world, but by doing things differently. And I'll share sort of 3 ways we're doing things differently, both in terms of what we fund and how we fund. And this is something hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about in the conversation. So one is, if you look at how most R&D is funded by governments, it falls, broadly speaking, into 2 modes. One is to say, well, we know there's a problem we want to solve. Let's direct funding towards that specific problem. And you can have sort of directed development. Or you say, we have incredibly rich scientific expertise. Let's just give them funds to explore and not mess with them.
That curiosity.
And kind of see the serendipitous positives that will come out. Our approach is a little different. We've said, well, you can talk about innovation being driven by ideas or the amount of funding, but really at the core, innovation is driven by people. So one thing that we've put at the heart of ARIO is an idea of putting people first and thinking about people and then projects or ideas or the funding. And that starts with, within ARIA, we've recruited a set of scientists and engineers who come into ARIA with the job of shaping a clear thesis on what we're going to fund, how ARIA's funding can be directed in a way which is going to fund something that wouldn't otherwise happen, either because it's too speculative or the bright pieces of the system wouldn't come together. And then that person's vision is directing our funding. And if you think about that, what that means is, it's not sort of a committee agreeing on things. We're going to get a higher variance. We're probably going to get it wrong more often, but it enables those visions to be bold and pure and go after these bold bets. So I think one of the differences is kind of this people then projects. The next is so much of world-changing innovation gets trapped at the boundaries of either siloed disciplines or institutions. I think everyone here knows that, and I think that's increasingly the case. So an important part of ARIA is to be able to sort of mix modes, be very interdisciplinary. When you look at our research programs, we have a vision that's been developed by an individual, and then who and what we fund follows from that. It's sort of form follows function. So most of our programs are funding a mix of universities, maybe an academic, maybe startups, big companies. It might be a couple of folks in their garage, literally. And the idea is if we join those up in new ways with a directed vision, maybe we get a different result. And then thirdly, and I think this will be interesting to this group, I'll wrap it here, is our view is in today's age, if our mandate is not to get marginal improvements to existing industries, but to really be transformative, our bet is that the vehicle for that is very likely to be entrepreneurship. And so we're thinking about this agency from the get-go, building science entrepreneurship into the DNA of the agency in a number of different ways, and that runs through the way we've designed our contracts, to the people we've recruited, to the way we're funding our grants, and that's it. And this is sort of still the starting point. We have 8 program directors. They've shaped 7 areas that we're funding right now. These are ranging from programmable plants to precision neurotechnologies to thinking about early warning systems for climate tipping points, and we can talk more about them. We have these 7 programs right now. We've also launched a partnership scheme that we call Activation Partners, really focus on injecting entrepreneurial reactivity and reactance into those different areas. We're funding a wide range of grants and research contracts across these 7 areas right now. And we're just in the process of selecting a new set of program directors who will be developing some new areas, which we'll be announcing sometime in the new year.
So how long do the program directors, how long's their tenure, as it were?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So one of the unique aspects of ARIA is we are hiring people to shape these programs, but very intentionally, they are hired on a short-term contract, so 3 to 5 years. And the idea is to say, we want you to come into ARIA for 3 to 5 years. When you're at ARIA, we want you to think about nothing but where can we direct our funding to be catalytic and transformative? And then you're going to go back out to, if you came from academia, you might go back to academia. We have program directors who have done startups before, who have been in big industry. And that's important for 2 reasons. One is about incentives. We don't want people within ARIA to be making decisions based on what I, as their boss, might think, their career progression, because that might push them to be more conservative. We want them to sort of bang their fist on the table and say, this is what needs to happen, even if folks don't quite agree with me. And that allows for that sort of short-term tenure. And then the other is we're hoping it also refreshes, right? So if you're going to have people shaping visions, the danger would be to have a very small number of people.
And one vision.
And one vision. Yeah. So by having a portfolio of program directors and a portfolio of programs, and then over time having that refresh, we believe we'll end up being able to sort of capture
and explore more potential and explore more ideas.
Exactly. And bring more perspectives. And
So I was going to ask you how you decide what projects you fund and how do you kind of work as an organization, but you've kind of covered that. So I'd love to kind of go to, what the minister was talking about, the kind of joined up approach, and you were talking about, systemic approach. So how do you view ARIA's role in the wider ecosystem? So the other institutions that are, existing institutions and existing innovation. What's the connection? What's the crossover? What's the linkage with that? Because that's the question we get asked quite a lot in terms of what the innovation ecosystem looks like, how do you position ARIA within, what the rest of the ecosystem that the minister was talking about?
So I think the important part is, as an R&D funding agency, we don't have our own labs, we're not doing our own research. So our impact is entirely built from being able to identify sort of sparks within the existing system that we can activate in new ways through our funding and kind of connect the dots in new ways.
Yeah.
So I think the important part is we are entirely dependent on all of the amazing institutions and sort of the core traditional R&D funding bodies that exists. It actually might be worth talking a little bit more about the question of how we fund. So I mentioned we have 7 areas. We call these our areas opportunity spaces. And the idea is that what our program directors ultimately do is they will put out a solicitation or a call for a very directed funding program, with a specific target. So I'll give you an example. Angie, one of our program directors, is a plant scientist. And we just released a program, we're actually now reviewing applications for a program called Synthetic Plants. And the idea there is that when you look at synthetic biology and how it's been applied to human health and biological systems, mammalian systems, first of all, the UK is right at the cutting edge of the world there, but there's been so much progress made. And then if you compare how synthetic biology has affected agriculture and plants, it's nowhere near the level of investment. And so Angie's bold bet is to say that actually one day, we will be able to, agriculture will be driven by really first principles based design of the functionality of plants that we want, using synthetic biology to be able to build plants that are more resilient to climate change, that are more productive in terms of delivering food and food security, potentially even where the fruits of the plants are designed to give new therapeutic benefits, essentially building medicine through plants, which is done through nature, but not in a designed way. So that's a funding program, which is then going to fund, as I mentioned, sort of a constellation of projects across academics and startups and big companies to try and see whether that is possible. Before she launched that program, what we said was, each of these programs is going to be very speculative. We don't know whether it's going to work. So let's start by actually aligning ourselves, orienting ourselves in a direction of what we call an opportunity space, an area where we think there's a reason to believe that there are breakthroughs to harvest. In her case, the broader space she's talked about is programmable plants. And the idea there is that actually you can think about plants as a technology platform. So this for me is really interesting. You think about technology platforms, you think about the iPhone.
Yeah.
Right? iPhone is a hardware technology. We have new versions that come out. Well, actually the same is true of plants. It's hardware, it has functionality that's useful. We can update the functionality. We have new versions of crops, whether that's through traditional breeding or synthetic biology. What's unique about plants as a technology platform? It is probably the only technology platform in the world that already has deployment and distribution channels at planetary scale. You think about climate change, food security. You need gigatons of carbon to move around the world. Well, we actually do that already with plants. And so Angie's insight was, well, wait a second, plants are an enormously powerful technology platform, but we don't treat them as such. And there's so much progress and innovation we can make. So in an opportunity space, we've said there are 3 things that are important. One is that there's something here that's highly consequential for the future of the UK and the world. Relative to that importance and impact, there's nowhere near enough research activity, or the right things haven't been joined up, and we can make a strong claim for that. And third is that there's a reason that right now our funding could actually unlock something new. And all 3 of those things were true. So we have this now program in synthetic plants, but we, over time, may have multiple other programs. These are all drawing on, to your point, amazing research happening in universities across the country, and research that's been funded by UKRI and others.
But it's joining the dots up.
Joining the dots. And hopefully that'll be a feedback loop where maybe, if we're lucky, something that we uncover in these programs then inspires the rest of the system to sort of update their priors.
And that's where you mentioned entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial talent. That's where that kind of comes in terms of the approach. That's what ARIA is driving, I suppose, as a secondary kind of result of the work. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Or is it built in more within your core, and is that what you're trying to drive as well?
Great question. I mean, so one thing you're hearing is just the way I talk about Aria, there is sort of an entrepreneurial mindset of kind of having a big vision and trying to bring it through. So that's kind of built into the DNA. But
And built into you.
and built into me, for better or worse. The other piece of it, though, is actually entrepreneurship as a vocation, in the sense that ultimately, if we get technical breakthroughs in the labs, we know very well that's not going to be enough.
Yeah, we need to commercialize them or find a way of getting them out of the lab and into the real world.
Exactly, yeah. So there are two pieces of that. One is, how do we make sure that the funding that when a breakthrough happens in one of our projects, how do we make sure that the team that has delivered that breakthrough is somehow surrounded by a set of people who is both motivated and has some sense of how to commercialize it? And then the other thing we think a lot about is, how do we surround the teams doing this work with a sense of what does it even mean to do that responsibly, right? Because the areas that I'm talking about, neurotechnology, programmable plants, it's not just about creating value economically.
Yeah, there's a responsible and ethical questions that comes with that, as we saw with GM crops many years ago, right?
Yeah, and these are really tricky questions, and our view around Aria is that we weren't put in place to tell the UK what technologies it needs. We were put in place to create new options that can lead to prosperity. And if we do that sort of with eyes wide open and with an open dialogue and sort of discourse around what are the implications and where are the benefits going to come from, we think that actually is going to deliver what we need.
But again, I think, and putting my digital ethics hat on,
please.
We have, again, world-leading expertise, world-leading organisations in that area. And again, it's about joining those dots up. So UK's leadership in the areas that you're exploring, UK's leadership over there, how do we bring those two together to help the whole system as a whole, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting. One of our program directors, 𝗧𝗲, actually used to build quantum computers. This is something that's pretty typical within our agency.
We have a few of those.
Yeah, exactly. Is people who sort of shift their perspective and they can bring new insights to an area. So he's actually building within Aria an opportunity space thinking about the benefits of neurotechnologies. And the idea there is that even though you hear a lot about neurotech, 𝗧𝗲's thesis is that it's still way underexplored relative to the value. And the simple thing to think about is, if you add up all of the diseases and disorders that we know about that are essentially neurological in nature, and it's everything from Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, but also mood disorders and depression, things that you probably have experienced or someone who has experienced. It's so pervasive, the social burden of those diseases. It's a long shot, but there is at least a chance that if we figured out how to interface with the nervous system in an elegant way, this is one of the insights around 𝗧𝗲's space, is that increasingly over the last few years, we're learning that these broad range of neurological diseases are actually diseases of neural circuits. So it's not just one part of the brain where you can put an implant in and just something magical happens. That's unlikely to be the case. It's different regions of the brain, there's different cell types, different temporal dynamics all operating in concert. So 𝗧𝗲 asks the question, well, what if we actually could interface with the brain elegantly at that circuit level? And if it's at least possible that if you could do that, you could have a single technology intervention that could address that broad range of disorders. Now, if you add up the social cost and the economic value of addressing that broad range of social disorders, it's about, I think it's 3x heart disease. I mean, the expected value of this technology suite is, some large percentage of global pharma. And so you say, well, why, wow, like that is an enormous prize. And then you can go talk to, and we talked to the biggest pharma companies in the UK, and we say, well, why aren't you doing more in this? And the answer is, actually, you're right. The potential value is potentially very large, but it's that's a weird hardware thing that's not normal for pharma. And B, it's extremely speculative. There's far lower hanging fruit for us to deliver not just value for our shareholders, but impact to society.
Short term versus long term.
And so that's kind of the perfect thing for a group like Aria. And 𝗧𝗲, as part of that exploration, one of the things he noticed was, when you think about neurotech, one of the goals is to figure out how to not make it too invasive for patients. he actually realized there's very little research with patient populations on how do they define invasiveness. And what is invasive? Is it more invasive to have a major helmet that you're wearing around all day long in your life, or to have an outpatient surgery? It's an interesting question, right? And normally you think about no surgeon involved is non-invasive, but actually maybe not. And so one of the things that's being funded as part of that program is to sort of ask that question in new ways with the social scientists and those sort of groups.
Asking questions in new ways seems to be what you're all about. It's amazing. You can have that tagline if you need it. I've got one more question that I wanted to ask, but I want to give a bit of time for people in the audience, if that's all right with you. So does anybody have a question for Ilan? Right, we've got one here at the front. Do we have a mic available?
I can also repeat the question if that's easier.
Hi, Tess. No, Tess is coming to you. And then just if you would say who you are and then ask your question.
Sure, thank you. Andy Sellers from Silicon Catalyst. Really interesting discussion, Sue and Ilan. My question relates to how does ARIA benchmark science excellence on a global scale? And what is sort of ARIA's position on sort of, you said the UK is one of the few places where we have sort of scientific critical mass. So how do we sort of benchmark and choose topics in the UK versus what's happening globally?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think one of the things when we started ARIA, one of the questions, because the mandate from Parliament, which we take very seriously, is broad. It doesn't specify a certain sector or discipline. It's across the board, how do we get more impact at the intersection of quality of life and economic growth? And the question became, where do you start? And there are a few ways to think about this. One is, where are the biggest opportunities and challenges for society? One is, where are there inflection points in the different technology domains where you can insert yourself right now? And one is, where does the UK have a differentiated advantage? And so one thought might be, actually, you need to start where the UK is better than anywhere else in the world. What we found is that that may or may not be the case, right? If you're asking new questions and you're looking at things in new ways, where you're not trying to catch up with what the rest of the world is doing, but you're doing something speculative where if it works, you're now ahead of the rest of the world. Our view is it's less about, are you the best right now? And it's more about, do you have enough critical mass of talent and institutions to actually deliver that breakthrough? And actually, one of the criteria we have for approving a program is, have we canvassed the landscape of people and institutions in the UK? And do we have evidence that there is enough of a critical mass? And so I haven't mentioned this, but if you go on our website, there's just a page called, I think, What We're Working On. And we've been very public and open with the thesis development. When our program directors first had an idea of, here's where I think I'm going to focus, we actually published a paper with their thinking. And we said, openly, give us feedback. Tell us where it's right or wrong, but also tell us about all of the things you know in the UK that are happening related to this space. And then the program directors are going and chasing all those people down and talking to them and learning about them. So I think really it's from kind of boots on the ground work to say, is there enough here to actually deliver the results?
I mean, the question I was going to ask is, and we talked a little bit about this before we started, is how do we link this community and the techUK community and the tech sector broadly with your community and with the ARIA and what those program directors are doing? There must be more that we could be doing together to support your work, or canvassing that community, or finding ways to think about what that commercialization next step looks like. So what can we do more together, or how do we work more together?
Thank you for asking. I mean, I think there's so much help we could use from everyone. What we're doing is very hard, but I think one is, early on when we're trying to shape the ideas of what we fund, being engaged in that process. Whether it's traditional tech, so many of our programs have a digital or AI component to it, or whether it's more kind of deep tech, hard tech, which is a lot of what we're doing. I'm sure if you go to that part of the website, which is what we're working on, and you spend some time with it, you will find at least one program that touches what you're doing. There's no question. It might be the precision neurotech program, which sounds like, implanting hardware, but so much of it is new modeling. and inference to figure out what's happening at the neural circuit level. And we need math and we need computer science. So
You need digital twins, you need
100%.
AI, you need, yeah.
So I think one is inputting into those programs. We're going to have, I mentioned, a new set of program directors starting in the new year. They're going to be shaping new areas. That's a great opportunity. And it's also a win-win because it potentially helps shape the program in a direction that you think is the most important one and where your constituency can be involved with. I think the second is the research programs themselves. Many of them have a tech component. And honestly, our impact comes from the people we fund. We would like to be funding this community in whatever ways make sense. So if you figure out what's happening early on, you then have a chance to apply for funding. Our funding calls are really accessible and easy to apply to. We also have seed funding calls, which is a 3-page application. And in 3 weeks, we tell you whether you have up to 500K to look for a breakthrough in one of our areas. And then the last is on the commercialization side, which is, and it's still early for us.
Yeah.
You know, we're just now, over the next few months, we're announcing our first funding across all these 7 areas. We've started to announce that. But if there's something that feels relevant, getting in touch with either us at ARIA or the researchers doing that work now to say, well, let's talk about if in 3 years you're successful, how might this translate out either through, I'm an entrepreneur and I'd like to get involved, or I have a venture capital fund, or my company might be interested in licensing.
Yeah, we're going this way. Where does that fit in with?
And anything, any ideas on how to make sure that we get what's happening at ARIA out to the community would be really beneficial.
I mean, my team is going to hate me, but my brain is fizzing with
Amazing,
ideas right now. So let's follow up with that. But if you also have ideas, techUK members, tell us, and then we'll talk to Ilan and his team, and we'll figure out how we can do this going forward, because it's something that we're really, really keen to do. I think the work that ARIA is doing is so incredibly exciting, but it's also how do we get that excitement out to that wider community as well.
I think the thing that keeps us up at night is that we're doing something, and the perfect person to fund or to help take the technology out doesn't hear about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's see if we can
community
help with
that
that.
you've engaged is going to be super valuable.
Absolutely. Any final questions? I have 2 minutes, so we can squeeze one in if it's a quick one, if Ilan's all right with that, and then we'll have to close. But just one, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. It's the gentleman that...
Hi, thanks very much. Great insight. Got a question. My name is 𝗨𝗲𝗀𝗶, 247 Strategy. I have a question more on the kind of supply and demand. Supply, we've heard about the innovation, everything that's been done in the academic community and the commercial community as well. But focusing on the demand and obviously getting business, getting government to kind of really embrace the moonshots that a lot of people here are doing. How do you think that culture could be changed in order to be, compared to other nations, so the US and others are adopting this, but how would you focus on changing that culture to establish that more increased adoption of everything that is being innovated here in the UK?
Yeah, Lord Valence highlighted public procurement as the procurement of innovation as key. But yeah, it's a great question. Is that where you're looking as well, or are you looking more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, I heard 2 parts of the question. I mean, one is how do you change the culture towards there being more appetite for these sorts of things? I mean, I think ARIA is a startup, which is, I think, a bet on people and timing, personally. And I think the bet of ARIA is that there is enough of a latent pool of talent in institutions that really wants to be taking bold bets and embracing them that we can activate. And between that sort of set of people that we support, and I mean, ultimately we need to prove something, which is we really do need some breakthroughs to come out on the technology side from these projects. But if we can prove, we say a program will be successful if it changes the conversation globally about what's possible or valuable. And I think if we can do that with a group of people that has this sort of appetite and ambition, then that will spread. That's the kind of bet. I think more practically, where does the kind of customer adoption and drive come from? I think for some of our programs, there will be a role for government procurement to pull things through. We have programs that are not, our climate programs really speak to, if we're right, how do we get a coalition internationally to do the next steps of this? So some will be government, some will be big companies, but as I mentioned, there kind of is no driving force as powerful as entrepreneurs. Just saying, I actually believe this future could exist. We talked about programmable plants and synthetic plants. the idea of disrupting the big five ag companies, I mean, the hardest business in the world to disrupt. And yet I have no doubt that sometime, it might be this generation or next or the one after, someone will create the next Monsanto or Bayer as an entrepreneur. And, that's the bet we're taking, is that we find that person.
Fascinating future. Well, good luck in asking those questions.
Thank you, yeah.
Let's keep talking about how we can do more to work together and explore what we can bring this community to your community and vice versa.
Yeah.
But Ilan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. And please come to get to know Ārya more. It's been such a privilege to be doing this.
Thanks
to you all.
Thank you for your leadership as well. Everybody, Ilan Groove.